Uranus is about to enter Gemini come July. So here we have the planet of occult intuition, the seventh ray sacred ruler, that which is responsible for expression, freedom, that which brings spirit into incarnation, into matter, is moving into a sign where at the exoteric level and in its lesser possible expression, often unfortunately expresses as the quarrelling brothers, the duality of the great forces. And we can see this historically when we look at different Uranus in Gemini periods where there's so much going on in terms of wars and conflicts, and in many cases resulting in positive collective change overall. And that's not a pro-war statement, by the way. It's just the reality that when we understand the occult significance of our cosmology and the fact that it's really all about energy and the receptivity of that to the energy by the various different bodies, the planetary body, humanity as a whole body onto itself, and the quality of reception based on certain degrees or certain levels of ignorance. So there are always going to be higher and low expressions, and unfortunately the warlike piece or the conflict piece is just this lesser aspect of Gemini that is going to continue to be demonstrated collectively as a consequence of our relative collective ignorance, let's say. So certain historical events that have transpired during Uranus and Gemini periods. We've got in its last iteration in the 40s, we had World War II. The beginning of the atomic age, United Nations was founded. Now, this is an interesting positive inkling, although the UN unfortunately seemed to be ultimately in the last analysis corrupted by materialistic forces, which is something that the Tibetan did essentially warn about in the books, though at the time, of course, because many of the books came out during this period, he spoke about it with the potential to be very positive. But just as a concept, United Nations, this is a very second ray and group oriented example or good example of the potential higher qualities of Uranus in Gemini, where you have communications, so that's Gemini, coming together, particularly with Uranus being a group oriented sign. It's about expressions, it has a lot to do with the organizing principle, right? The seventh ray is the ray of ceremonial order and magic, and so its connection there to Aquarius and group relatedness and working with groups of people to bring an outcome into being, with the intention of peace, unity, understanding, and relationship. It's a very Gemini second ray quality. So, of course, as I just mentioned, many a problem with the UN, but just in terms of a little spark of the ideal or the potential for the highest expression of those different ray forces. So that was the UN. The beginning of the Cold War. Now, isn't that interesting? Because the USA and Russia are both sixth ray personalities. So what a kind of funny, in a way, illustration of the quarrelling brothers, particularly because they're twins. So the two and the one are the same kind of deal there. But nonetheless, a war, unfortunately. And then communication technologies expanded. Radio, early television began to reshape media landscapes. There's a communication element of Gemini, and of course the electrical, innovative quality of Uranus in the seventh ray there. Aircraft missile technology. Okay, let's consider one iteration before that, Uranus in Gemini in late 1850s through the 60s. American Civil War. Okay, so again, a war between the opposites, but resulting in positive change. And the Gemini-Sagittarius axis is a very unstable axis, which in the best case scenario is about the shifting around of the interplay of forces so that we bring something else into being. Gemini, aside from Uranus for a moment, actually lacks seventh ray energy. Of all the rays, it has a connection to every other ray except the seventh ray. So I think that's very interesting that where we see this ungrounded quality in Gemini, it's part of its challenge and gift to be able to go into all these different places. And then we have Uranus as this very grounding ray coming into being, but yet it's still through this lens of this instability with Gemini and the Gemini-Sagittarius axis. So just in terms of the propelling of these forces that have radical change, and Uranus is connected to these themes anyway, revolution, shaking things up, but it's very dramatic shake-ups that seem to go on during these periods where we have this intensely fluctuating energy through the Gemini and Sagittarius axis. The American Civil War, telegraph expanded, again, expansion in communications and technology. Communication, Gemini, technology, Uranus. First transatlantic telegraph table. Isn't that cool as an electrical thing, right? And Uranus connected to electricity as a sort of dense manifestation or expression of the lightning, like a force that transcends the so-called 3D limits of a Saturnian concrete realm. Okay, so yeah, we'll leave it there in terms of examples, but just to give a sense of what we're dealing with, of course, we've got AI, which is exploding. We're going to see even more dramatic effects of this for better and for worse, bringing out some of the negative shadow aspects, of course, with the lesser self and the Quarrelling brothers. Now, in terms of some of the warlike stuff going on, just as a more personal note and practical note, please do have a think about, for those of you who are in more, what shall we say, unstable or potentially more negatively affected areas, please make sure you are covering your basics. Do have a think about just preparing for economic disruption, you know, power cuts, these sorts of things. You know, not to go into too much fear-based doomsday prepper type thing or thinking, but there is just a baseline practical application of the principle of care here. So making sure that you have other options for food and water if the power did cut all of a sudden. You know, could you sustain yourself for a period of time? Having a bit of a backlog of more difficult to perish foods. So just be thinking along those lines. Sometimes people don't want to go there because it brings up a lot of this instinctual fear, but the problem with doing that is it's reactionary and it's polarized, just as well as getting stuck in the fear, neurotic response is also the other aspect of polarization. And of course, during these periods of mass hysteria and panic, you know, you kind of want to set yourself up to be a person that won't collapse into that kind of collective reactivity. Yeah, so just have a think about that. Okay, so we're talking about some of the exoteric forces here still with the lesser brothers, but what about the esoteric potentials here? And we had a little inkling of that with the UN, but at a more personal level even, let's take our occult understanding of Gemini and Uranus a little bit more deeply. So Gemini is the sign of the two selves. In the higher octave, it is the higher self and the lesser self. It is the sign too of the cosmic Christ. So it is this broader level, the second ray force of synthesis across the multiple levels of being. And that is part of that mutability of Gemini there and its greater expression. So Uranus then, as a sacred planet of the seventh ray, is going to be linking up, well, with Mercury, of course, and there's a natural affinity between these two anyway. So we've talked about communications and technology and all of this, with the potential of bringing things together in synthesis. That's the best potential expression of the Gemini force. But then esoterically, we're considering Venus, which is the soul level ruler of Gemini, and Venus harmonizes those two opposing forces. So the evolutionary arc of Gemini, occultly considered, is the activation of the Buddhic aspect of Mercury, rather than just the mutability of my interest here and this idea here, we start getting the flickers of the intuition via the fourth ray energy of Mercury, the messenger of the gods, awareness of the two selves. Okay, so here's my personality self, but then there's this other. Okay, so So then Mercury in this instance is really starting to discern and differentiate. That's a higher quality of the discerning faculty of Mercury and the mind. Discern, differentiate, and then when there's the free choice made, with the free choice being implied in Gemini as opposed to in Pisces, where the two fish are bound together and there's the sort of imprisonment within matter, so to speak. So in Gemini we have this, okay, I could keep going this way, or I could see what happens if I bring in this deeper aspect of myself into the picture. So we've got the Mercury, Venus with the free choice, and then upon making that free choice, Venus in its marriage or alchemical aspect, this is the higher turn of the fifth ray, the alchemy, scientific ray, brings the two together. So this is in almost the Libran marriage way Venus rules Libra exoterically, bringing the two selves together. So then we think about Uranus, seventh ray planet of occult intuition, of collective evolution, of the Aquarian group orientation, just in terms of its more general impacts being made on the collective, just universally at a much bigger level, going beyond simply disciples, people really deliberately working with the soul, but just the general urge towards collective good that we're seeing come through as this Uranian mark as we move into the Aquarian age. So this quality of the occult intuition moving with Venus, we have a potential here for a great speeding up of the recognition of the other self and the potential synthesis of the other self with the form. So for those of you who have personal placements in Gemini, a potentially very powerful, quickening, transformative awakening of too many different, or just awakening to intuitive impulses from the higher self. This is the potential for this transit. And even if you don't have transits in Gemini, remember that Gemini is the sign which rules the building of the antahkarana. So outside of personal planets or not in Gemini, Gemini is important universally for that reason. And we look to where Gemini is in the natal horoscope to indicate the way in which that antahkarana is going to be built. So have a think about where Gemini is cusping in your particular natal horoscope, and be musing on these themes of the quickening of evolution, the recognition of the duality between the selves, because this is always the problem in Gemini, okay? And then, yes, the choice to merge with the other aspect of the self in this way. So a high degree of potentiality for the evolution of the mind. Mercury, of course, has its obvious connotations with the mind and mental processes. The higher turn is the Buddhic impulses and the receiving of those lightning intuitive impulses via the brain. Venus is fifth ray, ruling the Ajna center. It's about clear perception and the bringing together, the perfecting of the form. That's where we see her active in the Taurian sense, right? The bringing together of the form and perfecting it to shape matter into the correct expression of the divine. That's more of the Taurian quality right there. But the quickening of mental processes, a great need to meditate during this time, most especially again if you're someone with Gemini placements and mutable signs in general, because there is going to be that the lesser effect, because it's all about vibration and levels of reactivity, right, to different forces. So vibrational intensity, okay, that's the great problem of Gemini. So having to still quieten down, make sure that we have grounding practices to offset some of the potential exoteric effects of that instability, but really take some time to think deeply about the dual forces. Where do I see that in myself? Where is my exoteric life in contrast with my esoteric life? What is the current development of my mind? What is the degree of mental mastery or control I have over my mind? Certainly any kind of meditation into the head space and bringing awareness to the subtle body within the head centers, going to be important, great time to do that. Uranus is going to quicken and excel. Its association with revolution, we might say that if we were, let's say, a perfect advanced humanity, responding to consciousness in all the best possible ways, Uranus wouldn't have necessarily an association with revolution. The revolutionary quality is just the natural effect in the exoteric realm, because Uranus is the planet of God in a way. It is the spirit coming into form. So it is always that which is beyond what is currently concretized within the three worlds of being. Uranus is the hierarchical ruler of Aries, the sign closest to God, right, in terms of its higher mental states, transmitting the blueprints from the mind of God to be manifest and brought down into reality. And this is why it is the planet of occult intuition, the seeing beyond the naked eye. So if, again, we were a perfect humanity, it would just be the transits or the movements of Uranus we'd be able to bend and all collectively kind of respond to what the will of God is in that moment, let's say. But alas, the situation is that we're still an unadvanced humanity at a collective level. And so the flickerings of these impulses come through, but then they serve as that disrupting function in a world where the crystallization of the lesser Saturnian energies are so still imbued. The dark forces of materialism are still deeply entrenched into our global situation here. And remember that Uranus cannot follow man onto the cardinal cross at the point of the 3rd degree initiation. There's a breaking out of the crystallization of the lesser mental body. So the bondage and the imprisonment of Saturnian materialism versus the freedom of the spirit, which seems to transcend the certain laws of three-dimensional existence. And there we have the effect of technology and technological revolution, where I can be sitting in my room and then make a video, and that can go out to all these different people. If we told someone from 100 years ago that such a thing would be possible, they no doubt would not believe it. So, as is often the way when we are living the spiritual life, the practice of detachment, which is a higher quality of the second ray, the wisdom aspect, being able to see the big picture, it's going to be really important, because there's a lot of craziness going on in the world right now, and the rising tensions, the conflict in the Middle East. It's just important to remember and to hold that spiritual awareness that good will prevail, and that's true. That the materialistic forces, the dark forces, which seek to inhibit spiritual life, they can only slow things down, but not ever fully stop it. Stop the will to good, stop spirit, stop God, all of this. So it's important to try and foster that interior sense of peace and tranquility, just to help alleviate that potential negativity and the distress that comes with just being subject to these collective movements. And for some it will be more difficult than others based on your location and how we are at different levels getting impacted by all these dramas and conflicts personally. But to just keep that steady progress with the interior spiritual work, knowing that it is the greatest work that you can do if you are responding to the solar force, which I'm sure you are because you're here watching content like this. And to really ground that, because part of the upheaval and the disruption that we're seeing right now is in part a response of that negativity, of those limiting forces, of the planetary dweller on the threshold, let's say, as the shadow aspect of the earth entity, whatever, just as a macrocosmic example of what happens at the individual level with our own soul self and our lesser self, and the battle between those two. That is to say that things will be getting worse while things are getting better, essentially. There is much, with the breakdown of legacy media, there is a great quickening of our understanding of what is true, of the bringing consciousness to just the nefarious evil, collective evil that's been going on for a lot of time. Yes, there's the lesser Gemini problems as well, of the different opinions, the half-truths, and people polarizing into certain emotional complexes and things, while so much of the population is still astrally polarized. But nonetheless, there is a lot of good coming through all of the challenges right now. Of course, we've got Pluto in Aquarius. It's making a very long transit through that. So the exposing and the transforming of media and information and our group relations as a result of this. So, and think about that too with that trine that will necessarily be happening with Uranus and Pluto as these planets move through here. So there's some great work in the realm of the air element, group relations, understanding, comprehension, the activation of dualities, the awareness of dualities, with the potential for the resolving of conflicts with the dualities as well. Yes, the lesser quarrelling brothers, of course, but many, many more people are responding to the positive aspects of the Uranian influences. So I think that's all I will say today about this transit. Let me know what you think, what it brings up for you, this investigation, and look forward to hearing from you, and I'll see you in the next one. Thanks, everyone.